talk a little bit about how C-level effectiveness is different in a PE context versus maybe a more traditional corporate environment?
Yeah, this is something that I think, I guess now in hindsight, it's funny that I was surprised by it, but the more work that I did in private equity space, how it is different than in the corporate world, I think became more and more apparent. But I think it's interesting because when I work with our more traditional public corporate clients, especially at this level, we're talking a lot about strategy, and strategic thinking and vision become so important. And it's still important in private equity and CEO of a portfolio company, but I think strategy looks a little bit different. It's because the horizon is different, and so I don't know that we're always looking for this high-powered kind of McKinsey strategy, very, very long-term complex. I think it's about strategy in a portfolio CEO is really understanding, what are the three critical strategic priorities, really about focusing and understanding, obviously, the strategy a lot of times is already there, and it's understanding the investment thesis, and then I think the key is understanding the talent that you have, and do you have the right talent necessary to execute against that strategy. So I think it's less about developing this new vision and strategy. It's about understanding the investment thesis, and then I think really about assessing talent, being a good judge of talent, understanding what you have, and then the courage to make some of those decisions that these guys have been talking about in terms of you may need to make some changes. So how do I get the right talent that I need to execute against that? And even if I think I've got talent, guys or gals that are very capable, what we're doing today and what we need to do to get to that, to achieve the investment thesis, is still going to require people to do new things or develop new skills, because you're talking about significant new growth. And so even if you got somebody who's capable, you still need to be able to help them scale. You said scale earlier at the beginning, and I think that's so critical. That's such a big part of this. So you need the cognitive agility to be able to scale. We also need the talent acumen to understand the kind of talent you need to scale. And then I think really that ability to align. So I think alignment is so critical, to align the team around that strategy, and then drive performance. So I think things like alignment, strategic focus, obviously critical thinking and judgment, and then the ability to have some of those tough conversations, to get people to do things that they may not want to do. Around talent, as we talk about developing leaders, maybe it's less about how we think in the corporate world around these kind of longer term development programs and succession planning, those kinds of things. Those are still important, but you've got a much shorter horizon. And so I think it's about assessing talent, getting the right people in the right place, and then driving, and all of that with a sense of urgency and courage to make some of the tough decisions. That's a start. What would you add?
Yeah, well, I'll add two things. I think you covered them, but I'll kind of augment it a bit. The first is, I think the importance, the relentless drive for results in PE differentiates it, particularly from most public companies. And you're very exposed as a management team. You have a better, more involved governance structure, oversight structure than you have from a public company board, and you're on the hot seat every quarter at a board meeting if you're not achieving results, and I think that is a big difference. I saw this in my Capital One days where we were growing really fast, so you'd get left behind if you couldn't deliver. But there was a point when we got really big where I felt like I went from being an entrepreneur to a statesman. okay, that you can get by in a big kind of corporate, downtown headquarters building by being really good at like working the system. In the early days at Capital One, you had to build the system and you were much more exposed. And I think that's true in our PE companies as well. The other thing, and we talk about this all the time, and I'll give you an example from a recent interview where I asked someone, how would you build a team? And what I would say is the most critical thing in these businesses on the part of the CEO, and oftentimes the next level, is can they put together the right team underneath them? And I was interviewing someone, and it was obvious from their experience they had mostly had HR within their company hand them internal candidates to go into roles. And it's okay, well, you're not going to have any of those here. Now what are you going to do? Okay, because there's no bench. Okay, and the talent is not as strong as we'd probably like. Where you have talent, it's at the top 2 levels. Everybody below that, there's a big fall off to execute your, if you go into a business and you say, we need to really, we have to build a capability around digital marketing. They can't say, I'm going to move somebody from the inside who's never done digital marketing and get where you want to go, over the period of time we want them to get there, right? And so I think it's really critical that you have a CEO who's able to bring in multiple perspectives and recruit those individuals and assess that talent. And the team of people underneath them have to be able to do the same. So I think putting together a team and having the skills to do that is like way up there. I don't think you can succeed in our companies without doing that.
Yeah, I guess I would add, I always categorize it as the trade-off between long-term value with speed versus quarterly results. I see this transition multiple times where we get good executives that have had success, especially in publicly traded companies, where they're still in that quarterly mindset of earnings and hitting numbers on a quarterly basis, where you realize, there's horizons in traditional private equity, but I think the right private equity sponsors maybe still have a 5 to 7 year investment horizon, but they're doing the things to build the best business for the next 15 to 20 years. The ones that just focus on the 5 to 7 or 3 to 5 or whatever it is, that doesn't usually work out in the end for them. But if you're building the right long-term company with that time horizon, that's where you get the best success. And I think that's a transition. That whole idea of long-term value with speed confuses people, because you think, well, if I'm creating long-term value and I'm in a public company, sometimes that just seems like it's a little bit slower approach, and it's really not. And I think that's a transition for folks. We talked a little bit about just the ability to roll up sleeves again for people that have risen up the ranks of some really, especially in this community, some great public companies, but it's tough to go back to the work they were doing when they were in their late 20s, early 30s. And I think people underestimate how tough that transition is. I think we hit on this a little bit, but also this ability to go from strategy to execution. I think there's a little bit more of a strategy focus in some of these companies, and I think to Dennis's point, it is all about execution. You got to find the people that can do that the right way, and I think that the speed by which you need to do that is always an awakening.
Yeah, let me add one more thought. I don't think strategy is terribly important in most PE companies. I think you go in, you do the deal, and you kind of say, these are the drivers of value creation. We've identified them. We talked about it during due diligence with the team between, during the period from sign to close. And now it's about executing that plan. Okay, so I would say that on one level, like having the whiz-bang guy who can develop this really cool strategy to go in this new direction, probably not that important in our businesses. What is important is strategic thinking. But the example I use is really, really narrow. And we'll be talking about, a business where you need to bring in new talent at a certain level. And it's expensive talent, and the search is expensive, and the assessments are not inexpensive, and so on. But it's a capability that they need to drive results over the next 3 or 4 years. So the earlier you get started, the better likelihood you're going to start to see, not just digging a hole, but actually filling the hole and digging and building the hill, right? and I'll have a conversation with the CEO, and they want to like wait to start the search. And it's obvious to me that it's because they don't want to spend the money because they want to hit their plan for this year. And I'll kind of say, yeah, you can wait until January, but then you're not going to fill the job until June, and then you're not going to know how you're going to hit your plan next year because your 20% growth has to be there next year, and you're already behind on the trajectory from this year, right? And so I think strategic thinking is really important. That ability to make those integrated trade-offs between, how much is it going to hurt bonuses this year, but how much might it help the equity return downstream, right? I think sometimes those points are missed, and I think that's really important in these individuals. And then that leads to, then they have to be able to like have that conversation with the team, why they're going to bite the bullet and do something now, even though it may be a small impact on bonus payouts this year, but here's why it's going to pay off. And they have to have leadership skills to engage in those conversations and really lean into them.
Thank you, guys. Great insights.
Need help achieving high-performance leadership? Let's begin a conversation.